A dying German Shepherd collapses on the roadside, rain pouring as he weakly whimpers for help. A veterinarian haunted by a painful mistake from his past stumbles upon him, and what he does next shocks everyone. The scars on the dog's body hide more than just pain. They carry a cryptic message tied to an unresolved betrayal. But as the vet tries to save this fragile life, the deeper mystery begins to unravel. What secret does the dog carry? And will this desperate act of compassion lead to redemption or heartbreak? Stay tuned, because this story is just getting started. Oh, before we get into the story, comment below wherein the world you are watching from today. Dr. Sebastian Monroe gently wrapped the bandage around the golden retriever's paw, his movements precise and careful. "There you go, buddy, good as new," he said softly to the dog, who responded with a grateful lick to his hand. "Thank you so much, Dr. Monroe." Mrs. Thompson said, gathering her pet's leash, "Would you like to join us for dinner sometime?" "We'd love to. That won't be necessary," Sebastian cut in, managing a polite but distant smile. "Just keep the wound clean and dry for the next few days." He quickly turned away, busying himself with organizing supplies that didn't need organizing. After they left, Sebastian's shoulders slumped as he looked around his small clinic. The fluorescent lights flickered occasionally, and the waiting room chairs had seen better days. Paint peeled in the corners, and the examination table's padding was wearing thin. Each imperfection was a reminder of the dream he'd abandoned years ago, the animal sanctuary that would have been his life's work if not for that one terrible mistake. The bell above the door chimed, and Sebastian looked up to see Ethan Crawford walking in with a box of supplies. The widowed school teacher's kind eyes and warm smile made Sebastian inexplicably uncomfortable. "Thought you could use these," Ethan said, setting down the box. "The school science lab got new supplies, and I remembered you mentioning you were running low on Gowan antiseptic. You didn't have to," Sebastian mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "But thank you. Hey, I was thinking maybe we could grab coffee sometime, talk about I've got a lot of paperwork to catch up on." Sebastian interrupted, already retreating toward his office. "But thanks for the supplies." He didn't look back to see Ethan's disappointed expression, focusing instead on the safety of his solitude. "It was easier this way, safer. No connections meant no chances of letting anyone down again." The rain hammered against Sebastian's windshield as he drove home, his wipers barely keeping up with the downpour. Lightning flashed across the dark sky, illuminating a hunched shape by the roadside. Sebastian's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the form of a dog struggling to stay upright in the storm. His hands tightened on the steering wheel as he started to drive past. He couldn't save every stray he'd learned that lesson the hard way, but something made him glance in his rearview mirror. The German Shepherd's eyes met his, filled with a pain that reached straight into Sebastian's soul. "Damn it," he muttered, pulling over to the side of the road. The rain soaked through his jacket as he approached the dog carefully. The German Shepherd didn't move, just watched him with wary eyes. Its fur was matted with mud and what looked like blood, and one leg was clearly injured. "Hey there, buddy," Sebastian said softly, kneeling in the mud. "I'm here to help." He reached out slowly, letting the dog catch his scent. The shepherd's tail gave a slight wag, and Sebastian's professional eye caught the signs of severe exhaustion, an injury. Moving with gentle precision, Sebastian slipped off his jacket and wrapped it around the dog. "I've got you," he whispered, carefully lifting the large animal. The dog whimpered, but didn't struggle, seeming to understand Sebastian's intentions. Back at the clinic, Sebastian laid the shepherd on his examination table, his hands moving with practiced efficiency as he assessed the injuries. The dog's body told a story of recent trauma, cuts, bruises, and a possible fracture in the right hind leg. As Sebastian ran his hands along the dog's neck, checking for injuries, his fingers caught on something. Parting the wet fur revealed a familiar type of scar, the kind left by a microchip implant. His heart quickened at the discovery this wasn't just any stray. This dog belonged to someone. Sebastian's hands trembled slightly as he held the microchip scanner over the German Shepherd's neck. The device beeped, and his eyes widened at the name that appeared on the small screen. Karen Deo. The room seemed to spin as memories flooded back 5 years ago. Karen had been his biggest supporter, the wealthy philanthropist who promised to fund his dream of opening an animal sanctuary. He could still picture her standing in his office, her elegant suit and pearls contrasting sharply with the modest. "Veterinary clinic, this sanctuary will change lives, Sebastian," she'd said, then her blue eyes, bright with enthusiasm. "Your vision is exactly what this community needs." But 3 months later, everything had fallen apart. The promised funding disappeared without warning, along with Karen's warm smiles and encouragement. She'd sent a cold email explaining that her priorities had shifted, leaving Sebastian's dreams in shambles. The German Shepherd whimpered softly, bringing Sebastian back to the present. He looked down at the injured animal, noticing how the dog's gentle brown eyes held none of the betrayal he associated with its owner. "It's okay, boy," Sebastian murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears. "You're not responsible for any of that." He pulled up Karen's contact information on his computer, his finger hovering over the phone number, but a glance at the dog's injuries made him pause. The leg needed immediate attention, and the cuts required careful cleaning to prevent infection. Sebastian pushed away from his desk. The past could wait. Right now, this dog needed him. He gathered his medical supplies, pushing thoughts of Karen to the back of his mind. "Let's get you fixed up first," he said to the shepherd, who responded with a grateful thump of his tail against the examination table. The first few nights were the hardest. Sebastian slept on the clinic's worn couch, waking every 2 hours to check on Yoda. The German Shepherd's breathing was labored, and his injuries required constant attention. Sebastian carefully fed him through a tube, speaking in soft, soothing tones. "Just a little more," he whispered gently, stroking Yoda's matted fur. The dog's eyes, though tired, followed Sebastian's every movement with unwavering trust. On the third morning, the bell above the clinic door chimed. Sebastian looked up from his paperwork to find Ethan standing there, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this," Ethan said, placing one cup on the desk. His kind eyes took in Sebastian's disheveled appearance and the dark circles under his eyes. Sebastian wrapped his hands around the warm cup, the exhaustion suddenly hitting him. "Thanks," he mumbled. "Want to tell me about your new patient?" Ethan asked, pulling up a chair. Maybe it was the lack of sleep, or perhaps the genuine concern in Ethan's voice, but Sebastian found himself sharing the story of finding Yoda in the storm. As he talked, they heard a scratching sound from the recovery room. Both men hurried to check on Yoda. The German Shepherd had managed to stand on shaky legs, his tail wagging slightly at their entrance. Sebastian's heart swelled with pride and hope. "Look at that," Ethan said softly. "He's a fighter." Sebastian watched as Yoda took one wobbly step, then another. The dog's determination was visible in every movement, despite the obvious pain. When Yoda's legs began to tremble, Sebastian quickly moved to support him. "Easy there, buddy," he murmured, helping Yoda lie back down. The dog licked his hand in response, and Sebastian felt something in his heart shift, a wall beginning to crumble. That evening, after Yoda had settled in for the night, Sebastian sat at his desk with his laptop open. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before typing Karen Deo into the Sec bar. The results made his breath catch. Karen's face stared back at him from dozens of business articles. She had become CEO of her family's company, transforming it into one of the region's largest investment firms. But it was a more recent headline that caught his attention. Business leader Karen Deo mourns loss of husband. Sebastian leaned closer to the screen, reading about Henry Deo's unexpected passing 6 months ago. The article mentioned his love for animals, particularly his beloved German Shepherd. "Have you called her yet?" Ethan's voice startled him. Sebastian hadn't heard him come in with the evening medications for Yoda. "No," Sebastian admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not sure I can face her after everything." Ethan pulled up a chair beside him. "Look at Yoda," he said softly. "That dog's been through hell, but he's still fighting, still trusting. Maybe it's time you showed the same courage." Sebastian glanced toward the recovery room where Yoda lay sleeping. Despite his injuries, the dog had shown remarkable spirit, refusing to give up. Each small victory, a wagging tail, a few steps taken, felt like a miracle. "There's something strange about all this," Sebastian muttered, scrolling through more articles. Karen's husband dies, and months later their dog ends up half dead on a country road. "It doesn't add up." "Only one way to find out," Ethan said gently. Sebastian's hand instinctively went to his phone, but stopped. The memory of Karen's betrayal still stung. The sanctuary that never was, the dreams that crumbled. But as he watched Yoda's chest rise and fall in peaceful sleep, he Wondered if some dreams were worth fighting for again. Sebastian's hand trembled as he dialed Ken's number. Each ring made his heart beat faster until Karen Deo. Speaking, her voice was exactly as he remembered it, crisp and professional. Karen, it's Sebastian. Monroe. A long pause followed Sebastian after all of these years. He took a deep breath, glancing at Yoda, who lay nearby. I found your dog, Karen. Yoda, he was badly injured on Route 27. That's impossible. Karen's voice sharpened. Yoda is with Thomas, my caretaker. I arranged everything before my business trip to London last month. The microchip doesn't lie, Sebastian said firmly. What happened to him, Karen? I don't know what you're talking about. Thomas assured me. She paused. Look, I've been abroad. I trusted Thomas to care for Yoda while I dealt with everything after Henry's death. Something in her voice didn't ring true. Sebastian pressed further. Where can I find Thomas? I'll have to get back to you on that, Karen said quickly. I have a meeting. Karen, wait. But she had already hung up. Sebastian stared at his phone, frustrated. Walking over to Yoda, he knelt beside him, running his hand gently through the dog's fur. As he did so, his fingers caught on something beneath the matted collar. Carefully, he turned the worn leather over there. Tucked into a hidden pocket was a small metal tag, different from the regular identification tags. This one was tarnished and scratched. Sebastian held it under the light, squinting at the engraved message. Karen, the truth is in the sanctuary. Love, Henry. Sebastian read the words again, his mouth going dry. Whatever had happened to Yoda, Henry Deo had known something was wrong, and somehow it was connected to the sanctuary. That never was. Sebastian's fingers traced the worn edges of the tag, his heart heavy with the weight of Henry's words. The message was more than just a note. It was a final wish, a bridge between past and present. Look at this boy, he whispered to Yoda, who lifted his head weakly. The German shepherd's eyes seemed to hold a deeper understanding, as if he knew the significance of what Sebastian had found when Ethan stopped by later that evening with fresh blankets for Yoda. Sebastian showed him the tag. This changes everything, Sebastian said softly, passing the metal disc to Ethan. Henry wanted Yoda to be there for Karen after he was gone. He knew Ethan read the message twice. His expression thoughtful. Henry must have known his time was short. He trusted Yoda to help Karen through her grief, but instead Yoda ended up abandoned on the side of the road. Sebastian's voice cracked with emotion as he knelt beside the recovering dog. Someone betrayed Henry's last wish. You need to find out what happened, Ethan urged, placing a gentle hand on Sebastian's shoulder. Not just for Yoda, but for Henry too. This wasn't just about leaving a pet behind. This was about breaking a dying man's final request. Sebastian watched as Yoda slowly lifted his head to nuzzle his hand. The dog's eyes, warm and trusting, reminded him of the depth of love Henry must have felt for both his wife and his faithful companion. You're right, Sebastian said, his resolve strengthening. Henry wanted Yoda to be Karen's guide through her grief. Something went wrong, and I need to understand what. Sebastian stood at the imposing iron gates of the Deo estate, his heart pounding. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn, making the mansion seem even more intimidating. He clutched Henry's tag in his pocket, drawing strength from its presence. A security guard approached, his expression stern. Can I help you, sir? I'm Dr. Sebastian Monroe. I need to speak with Karen Deo. It's about Yoda. The guard's eyes narrowed. Mrs. Deo isn't receiving visitors. After several tense minutes of back and forth, the guard made a phone call. Sebastian waited, watching the perfectly trimmed hedges sway in the breeze, so different from his modest clinic's overgrown garden. Finally, the gates creaked open. A housekeeper led him through a marble foyer into a sunlit sitting room where Karen sat perfectly poised in an expensive suit. Her face, though older than he remembered, still held the same sharp determination. Sebastian, she said coolly, this is unexpected. Karen, he took a deep breath. I found Yoda. Her composed expression flickered for just a moment. Yoda went missing months ago. The caretaker informed me he was half dead by the roadside. Sebastian said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Henry trusted you with him. I ensured he was properly cared for, Karen replied dismissively. These things happen. Dogs run away sometimes. Sebastian pulled out the tag, holding it up so it caught the light. Henry left this message. He wanted Yoda to help you after he was gone. Karen's mask cracked slightly as She read the words, her hands trembled before she quickly clasped them together. That was a long time ago. Henry knew you'd need support after. I can't do this, Karen cut him off, standing abruptly. Her voice wavered despite her attempt at firmness. I won't relive the past. What's done is done. Please see yourself out, Karen, I said. Leave. She turned away, but not before Sebastian caught the glimmer of tears in her. As I can, I won't talk about Henry or Yoda. Not now, not ever. Sebastian couldn't let Karen's dismissal be the end of it, not when Yoda had suffered so much. There's someone you need to see, he said firmly. He's in my car. Karen's eyes widened with recognition. You brought him here. You owe him that much. After a long moment, Karen nodded stiffly and followed Sebastian outside to his weathered station wagon. Inside, Yoda lay on a blanket in the back seat, his injuries still visible despite weeks of healing. Sebastian opened the door carefully. It's okay, boy, come on out. Yoda struggled to his feet, his movements still uncertain. When he caught sight of Karen, his ears flattened against his head. A low growl rumbled in his throat, not threatening, but hurt and betrayed. He backed away from her, pressing against Sebastian's legs. Karen's perfectly composed facade crumbled. Her hand flew to her mouth as she took in Yoda's condition, the healing wounds the way he favored his left side, the patches of fur still growing back. Her voice broke. I couldn't look at him after Henry died. Every time I saw him waiting by Henry's chair or bringing me Henry slipper. She wrapped her arms around herself. It hurt too much. He was a constant reminder of everything I'd lost. So you abandoned him. Sebastian's voice was gentle but firm. Henry trusted you with him. Yoda loved you both. I thought. The caretaker. Karen's words trailed off as Yoda turned away from her, seeking comfort from Sebastian. Instead, I should have made sure you made choices, Karen. Sebastian said quietly, choices that hurt an innocent creature who only wanted to love you the same way you made choices years ago that hurt other people who cared about you. Karen's shoulders slumped, the weight of her actions finally seeming to reach her. She watched Yoda press closer to Sebastian, her carefully maintained composure dissolving into visible regret. But she remained silent, caught between pride and remorse, unable or unwilling to take the final step toward redemption. Back at the clinic, Sebastian watched as Yoda hobbled across the examination room toward Ethan, who sat cross-legged on the floor for the first time since his rescue. Yoda's tail gave a tentative wag. Would you look at that? Ethan said softly, his eyes bright with emotion. He's really coming around. Sebastian's chest tightened with a familiar mix of pride and wonder over the past weeks. He'd witnessed Yoda's transformation from a broken, terrified creature to one who was slowly learning to trust again. The dog's resilience touched something deep inside him, stirring memories of his old dreams. Ethan ventured, scratching behind Yoda's ears. This place could be more than just a clinic. You've got the skills, the heart for it. Sebastian leaned against the examination table, his fingers absently tracing the worn edge. The sanctuary. I haven't thought about that in years. Not seriously. Anyway, maybe it's time you did. Ethan's voice was gentle but encouraging. Look what you've done for Yoda. Think of all the other animals you could help. Yoda limped over to Sebastian, pressing his warm body against his legs. Sebastian knelt down, running his hands through the dog's slowly recovering coat. After what happened with that horse, I convinced myself I didn't deserve another chance. But watching Yoda heal, Sebastian continued, his voice thick with emotion. Seeing him fight his way back, it's made me realize something. Maybe second chances aren't about deserving them. Maybe they're about being brave enough to take them. Ethan's face lit up. I could help with fundraising. The school board has connections, and the kids would love to get involved. We could start small, build it up gradually. As Sebastian listened to Ethan's enthusiastic planning, he felt something shift inside him. The weight of his past mistakes seemed lighter somehow, as if Yoda's journey toward healing had shown him a path toward his own redemption. You really think it's possible? Sebastian asked, watching as Yoda settled contentedly between them. I know it is, Ethan replied firmly, and I'll be there every step of the way. The bell above the clinic door chimed, and Sebastian looked up to find Karen standing awkwardly in the entrance. She wore an expensive suit that seemed out of place in the modest waiting room. I wanted to check on Yoda's progress, she said, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. Sebastian nodded, leading her toward the back room, where Ethan sat with Yoda. During their daily physical therapy session, they paused in the doorway, and Karen's breath caught as she watched the scene before her. Yoda was attempting to fetch a softball, his movements still stiff but determined. Ethan's gentle encouragement filled the room as he guided the dog through the exercise. "That's it, buddy. You're doing great." Sebastian noticed Karen's hands trembling slightly as she gripped her designer purse. "He's made remarkable progress," he said quiet. His spirit never broke, even when his body nearly did. They stood in silence, observing the session. Ethan hadn't noticed them, yet too focused on Yoda's exercises. He said to the dog, "You've changed things around here." Sebastian's talking about the sanctuary again, really talking about it this time. Karen glanced at Sebastian, who kept his eyes fixed on Yoda. "Remember when we first found you?" Ethan continued, unaware of his audience. Sebastian was so closed off, so afraid to hope, but look at him. Now look at all of us. Now you've given him back his dream, buddy. Tears welled in Karen's eyes as she watched Yoda nuzzle Ethan's hand. The dog's trust, his capacity for love, despite everything he'd been through, struck something deep within her. She thought of Henry's message on the collar, his wish for Yoda to guide her had she failed them both. "I should go," she whispered, backing away before either man could notice her emotional state. But she lingered just long enough to see Yoda look up, his eyes meeting hers with that same knowing gaze that had once brought her so much comfort after Henry's death. As she hurried toward the exit, her carefully constructed walls began to crack, Henry's words echoing in her mind. "Yoda will guide you when I no longer can." The next morning, Sebastian was checking Yoda's bandages when his phone rang. An unfamiliar voice introduced himself as Mike from Valley Construction. "We're scheduled to start work on your clinic next week," the contractor said cheerfully. "Just wanted to confirm the details." Sebastian's brow furrowed. "There must be some mistake. I haven't scheduled any repairs." "Oh no, mistakes are the works. Already been paid for in full. New windows, fresh paint, updated waiting room, the whole package." Sebastian's heart raced as he pressed for more information. The contractor explained that the client wished to remain anonymous, but a quick call to the construction company's office revealed what he suspected: the payment had come from Deo Industries. When Ethan stopped by later that afternoon, Sebastian was still processing the news. "Karen's behind this," he said, running a hand through his hair. "But why now?" Ethan sat on the floor next to Yoda, who was dozing peacefully. "Maybe seeing you and Yoda yesterday affected her more than we thought. People can surprise us, Sebastian, or she's trying to ease her guilt." Sebastian countered, his voice tight. "You didn't see how she treated Yoda before, how she abandoned him." "True," Ethan said carefully, "but making amends has to start somewhere, doesn't it?" Sebastian looked around his worn-down clinic at the cracked windows and peeling paint. The repairs would make a real difference for his patients and their owners, but accepting help from Karen felt like opening an old wound. "I don't know if I can trust her intentions." Sebastian admitted, his shoulders sagging. "Not after everything that happened." Yoda lifted his head and whined softly, as if sensing Sebastian's inner turmoil. Ethan reached over to scratch behind the dog's ears. "Maybe this isn't about trust, yet maybe it's just about taking a first step." Sebastian sat at his desk late that evening, surrounded by scattered papers, covered in notes and rough sketches. Ethan had pulled up a chair beside him, and Yoda dozed contentedly at their feet. "We could start small," Ethan suggested, pointing to their rough layout. "Maybe focus on just a few rescue animals at first, build up slowly." Sebastian nodded, but his stomach churned with familiar anxiety. "The last time I planned this," he trailed off, his fingers absently tracing the edge of an old blueprint through the clinic's back door. They could hear the gentle barking of the overnight patients. Yoda's ears perked up at the sound, and he rose, carefully padding over to the door with growing confidence in his steps. "Look at him," Ethan said softly. "He's come so far." Sebastian watched as Yoda approached the recovery kennels, where a young retriever wagged her tail in greeting. The two dogs touched noses through the gate, and something warm stirred in Sebastian's chest. "HEK good with them," Sebastian admitted. "Better than any therapy dog I've worked with." But even as he spoke the words, doubt crept back. In the sanctuary had been his dream once before. Karen's withdrawal had left him scrambling to cover costs before the bitter disappointment had taught him how quickly dreams could crumble. "I see those wheels turning," Ethan said gently. "What's really holding you back?" Sebastian stared at the plans Before him, what if it all falls apart again? The last time, I let down so many animals that were counting on me. I'm not sure I can risk that happening twice. Yoda returned to Sebastian's side. Resting his head on his knee, the gesture was so full of trust that it made Sebastian's throat tight. Maybe we should break it down, Ethan suggested, pulling a fresh piece of paper forward. What's the smallest first step we could take? Karen's heels clicked against the hardwood floors of her EMP mansion as she made her way to Henry's study. The room remained exactly as he'd left it, his reading glasses still perched on the leather-bound journal he'd been writing in before his final hospital stay. Her fingers trembled as she opened the bottom drawer of his desk, pulling out a worn photo album. There, on the very first page, was Henry kneeling beside a squirming German Shepherd puppy, his smile radiating pure joy. The date scribbled beneath read, Yoda's Gata Deo. Henry, she whispered, sinking into his old chair. The memory washed over her like a warm wave. It was their 5th anniversary, and Henry had insisted on blindfolding her before leading her to the backyard. When she'd open her eyes, there he was holding a wiggling ball of fur with oversized ears. Meet Yoda. Henry had set his eyes twinkling. I chose him because he reminds me of you, loyal, strong, with the biggest heart I've ever known. Karen's vision blurred with tears as she traced Henry's face in the photograph. That day, he'd explained how German Shepherds were known for their unwavering devotion, how Yoda would be there even when Henry couldn't be. He'll be your guardian angel, Henry had promised, placing the puppy in her arms, but she failed them both after Henry's death. Every look from Yoda's soulful eyes had felt like an accusation, a reminder of the love she'd lost. Instead of letting the dog heal her as Henry had intended, she'd pushed him away, handed him off to caretakers who'd ultimately lost him. Karen closed the album and grabbed her car keys. Sebastian's clinic was only 15 minutes away, yet as she sat in her parked car outside the building watching through the window as Yoda interacted with other animals, she couldn't bring herself to go. And the words "I'm sorry" felt stuck in her throat, weighted down by years of guilt and regret. The small town's weekly newspaper, the Valley Chronicle, sat open on Sebastian's desk. The headline read, "Local Vet's Second Chance, a tale of hope and healing." Below, it was a photo of Yoda, his fur now glossy and thick, sitting proudly beside Sebastian at the clinic. "Can you believe this?" Sebastian asked Ethan, who was sorting through boxes of donated supplies that had started arriving that morning. Mrs. Chen's kids brought their entire piggy banks to contribute. Ethan smiled as he pulled out new blankets, pet food, and medical supplies. "My students haven't stopped talking about it since the article came out. Tommy's family is offering to help rebuild the kennels, and Sarah's mom wants to organize a fundraising bake sale." Yoda padded over to investigate a box, his tail wagging as he sniffed at the treats inside. His recovery had become a symbol of hope for the whole community. Sebastian picked up an envelope that had arrived in the morning mail. The return address showed it was from Alice Turner, one of the sanctuary's former volunteers. His hands trembled slightly as he read, "Dear Dr. Monroe, I saw the article about Yoda and your plans to reopen the sanctuary. I needed to tell you how working there changed my life. That summer I spent helping injured animals taught me more about healing and compassion than any classroom ever could. The sanctuary wasn't just a place for animals to heal, it helped people find their purpose too. Please don't give up on this dream. We need more places like this in the world." Sebastian looked around his clinic, taking in the boxes of donations and the handmade Save the Sanctuary posters created by Ethan's students. Yoda rested his head on Sebastian's knee, those wise brown eyes gazing up at him with complete trust. "One, guess we're really doing this," Sebastian said, softly scratching behind Yoda's ears. Karen's sleek black car pulled up to the clinic. Just as the morning sun broke through the clouds, she sat there for a moment, her hands gripping the steering wheel before gathering the courage to step out inside. Sebastian was checking Yoda's latest x-rays when he heard the bell above the door chime. He turned to find Karen standing awkwardly in the waiting area, her designer outfit a stark contrast to the humble surroundings. "Sebastian," she said, her voice softer than he remembered from their last encounter, "I've been doing a lot of thinking." Yoda lifted his head from his bed in the corner, watching Karen with cautious interest. Ethan, who had been organizing files nearby, quietly stepped back to give them privacy. "I was wrong," Karen continued, pulling out a checkbook from her expensive handbag about everything the way I treated you years ago, abandoning Yoda after Henry died. I let grief turn me into someone I'm not proud of. Sebastian crossed his arms, waiting silently as she wrote out a check with trembling fingers. This should cover the sanctuary's reopening costs, she said, holding out the check. It's the least I can do. Sebastian glanced at the amount and slowly shook his head. Money isn't what this sanctuary needs most, Karen. It needs people who truly care, who are willing to put in the time and effort to help these animals heal. What are you saying? Karen asked, lowering the check. If you want to make things right, prove it. Don't just write a check and walk away. Get involved. Help us rebuild what you once helped tear down. Yoda had made his way over to Karen, and for the first time since Henry's death, she knelt down to his level, tears forming in her eyes as the dog cautiously sniffed her hand. The following weekend, Karen arrived at the clinic wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of her usual designer clothes. Her hands shook slightly as she filled water bowls and measured out food portions for the animals under Sebastian's watchful eye. Yoda observed her from his favorite corner, his head tilted with curiosity. As Karen worked, she kept glancing his way, her movements becoming more natural with each passing hour. You're doing fine, Sebastian said, noticing her nervousness. The animals can sense when you're genuine. Karen nodded, wiping her brow. It's been so long since I've done anything like this. Henry used to say the same thing about animals knowing what's in your heart. As she knelt to clean a cage, Yoda slowly made his way over to her. His tail gave a tentative wag, and for the first time since their reunion, he pressed his nose against her hand. Karen froze, tears welling up in her eyes. I couldn't look at him after Henry died, she whispered, her voice breaking every time Yoda stared at me with those knowing eyes. I felt judged, like I wasn't worthy of the love Henry had given us both. Sebastian sat down beside her as Yoda settled his head in Karen's lap. He wasn't judging you, Karen. He was trying to help you heal, just like Henry. And I know that now, she said, gently stroking Yoda's fur. I was so wrapped up in my grief that I mistook his loyalty for judgment. Henry always said Yoda would be there for me, but I pushed away the very comfort he tried to leave behind. Ethan, who had been quietly organizing supplies nearby, smiled at the sight of Karen and Yoda finally reconnecting. The German Shepherd's tail wagged more confidently, now his eyes soft as he looked up at Karen. The peaceful morning at the clinic shattered when Karen burst through the door, her face pale and hands trembling. As she clutched a legal document, Sebastian looked up from where he was checking Yoda's latest x-rays. Immediately sensing something was wrong, it's Thomas, Karen said, her voice shaking. My brother is claiming Yoda belongs to Henry's estate. He's filed papers to have him removed from your care. Sebastian's heart dropped as he took the document from Karen's hands. Yoda, sensing the tension, pressed against Sebastian's leg with a soft whine. But why now? Sebastian asked, scanning the legal papers. After all this time, Thomas has always been bitter about Henry leaving most of the estate to me, Karen explained, sinking into a nearby chair. He must have seen the newspaper article about the sanctuary. Ethan, who had been helping with morning feeds, stepped forward. He can't just take Yoda away, not after everything we've done here. We won't let him, Sebastian said firmly, placing a protective hand on Yoda's head. We have documentation of abandonment, medical records, everything showing we've acted in Yoda's best interest. Karen wiped tears from her eyes. Thomas doesn't care about Yoda. He's just trying to hurt me to hurt us. Ethan pulled out his phone. I know people in town who will stand behind you. Both the whole community has seen what you're building here. They won't let this sanctuary fall apart because of one man's greed. Sebastian watched as Yoda moved between him and Karen, as if trying to comfort them both. The thought of losing him now, just when everything was falling into place, made his chest tight with fear. We'll fight this, Karen said, her voice growing stronger as she reached for Yoda. Together, the law office of Mitchell and Associates felt small and stuffy as Sebastian and Karen sat across from Linda Mitchell, a local attorney known for her work with animal rights cases. Yoda lay quietly at Sebastian's feet, his presence a constant reminder of what they stood to lose. The good news is we have substantial documentation, Linda said, spreading papers across her desk. The medical records show clear evidence of neglect before Dr. Monroe found him, and the Remarkable recovery under his care speaks volumes. Sebastian nodded his hand, absently stroking Yoda's fur. What about Karen's testimony? Karen shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I'll do whatever it takes, she said quietly, even if it means facing Thomas and admitting I abandoned Yoda after Henry died. The truth needs to come outside the law office. The town was buzzing with activity. Ethan had organized a weekend fundraiser at the local park, complete with a pet parade and bake sale. Handmade signs reading "Save Our Sanctuary" and "Keep Yoda Home" dotted the park's entrance. The whole town's behind you, both Ethan told Sebastian as they watched volunteers setting up booths. Mrs. Henderson's fourth-grade class even made a banner. Sebastian felt overwhelmed by the show of support. For years, he'd kept the community at arm's length, convinced he didn't deserve their trust after his past mistake. Now, watching neighbors and strangers alike come together, he felt something shift inside him. Karen stood nearby, helping arrange donated items for the silent auction. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed a framed photo of Henry with Yoda as a puppy on the display table. I never thought I'd have to face Thomas like this, she admitted when Sebastian approached, but seeing all these people here supporting us, it gives me courage. Yoda wagged his tail, moving between them as if sensing their need for comfort. The German Shepherd's recovery had become a symbol of hope for the entire community, and now they were all united in fighting to protect him. The county courthouse loomed before them, its brick facade stern and imposing in the morning light. Sebastian held Yoda's leash tightly as they climbed the steps, Karen walking beside them with shoulders squared despite her obvious tension. Inside the courtroom, Thomas Deo sat with his expensive lawyer, his tailored suit and cold demeanor, a stark contrast to Karen's simple dress and nervous fidgeting. When he stood to present his case, his voice dripped with calculated precision. Your Honor, this is a simple matter of estate law. Thomas declared the dog in question is legally part of the Deo family assets, and my sister has proven herself incapable of responsible ownership. She abandoned the animal after my brother-in-law's death, demonstrating a clear pattern of neglect. Karen's hands trembled as she took the stand. Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice remained steady. Yes, I failed Yoda, she admitted, looking directly at the judge. After Henry died, every time I looked at Yoda, I saw my husband's face. The pain was unbearable, and I made terrible choices. But I'm here now, working to make things right. Thomas's lip curled in disgust. This sudden change of heart is convenient, isn't it? He turned to address the judge again. My sister's irresponsibility extends beyond the dog. The entire estate has suffered under her management, and this is simply one more example of her incompetence. A murmur rippled through the courtroom as Thomas's true intentions became clear. Sebastian watched as the judge's expression darkened, clearly catching the underlying message in Thomas's words. Mr. Deo, the judge interrupted, are you more concerned with the welfare of this animal or with gaining control of your late brother-in-law's estate? Thomas's mask of concern slipped for a moment, revealing a flash of anger. The entire estate needs proper management, Your Honor. The dog is merely one asset that requires outrage. Gas filled the courtroom. Yoda, who had been lying quietly at Sebastian's feet, lifted his head and let out a low growl. In the days following the heated courtroom exchange, letters began pouring into the courthouse. Ethan had organized the community's response, and the judge's death soon overflowed with stories of hope and transformation. Watching Yoda heal showed my children what real courage looks like, wrote Mrs. Thompson, whose twins had been visiting the clinic weekly. That brave dog taught them to never give up. Sebastian sat in his office after hours, Yoda's head resting on his lap as he read through copies of the letters, his fingers gently scratched behind Yoda's ears, earning a contented sigh from the German Shepherd. You've touched so many lives, old boy. Sebastian whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I won't let anyone take you away. Whatever it takes, I'll protect you. Yoda lifted his head, pressing his nose against Bastian's hand, as if understanding every word. At her estate, Karen sorted through old photographs of Henry and Yoda, no longer flinching at the memories they stirred. One picture showed Henry teaching Yoda to shake hands, both of them beaming with joy. She traced the image with trembling fingers. Henry always said Yoda represented everything good in life: loyalty, love, resilience. Karen shared with Sebastian when she visited the clinic later that day. I lost sight of that after Henry died, but watching Yoda recover, seeing how he's brought this community together, I finally understand. What Henry meant, the clinic's waiting room had become an impromptu gathering place for supporters. People dropped by with encouragement, homemade treats, and more letters. Ethan coordinated their efforts, creating a wall of photos showing Yoda's journey from the injured dog Sebastian had found to the symbol of hope he'd become. Thomas doesn't understand, Karen said, watching a young girl give Yoda a gentle pat. This isn't about property or assets. It's about family, about healing, about second chances. Thomas Deo strode into the courthouse with a smug smile, clutching a manila envelope that made Sebastian's stomach twist with worry. The morning sun cast long shadows through the windows as Thomas's attorney presented their new evidence. We have testimony from James Miller, a former clinic employee. Thomas announced, his voice dripping with satisfaction. He witnessed Dr. Monroe abandoning Yoda after initially finding him, only to retrieve him later when it became convenient. Sebastian's face paled as he listened to the lies being presented. Karen reached over and squeezed his hand, her jaw set with determination, but something about the testimony didn't add up. Karen remembered every employee who had worked at the clinic during her involvement, and the name James Miller wasn't familiar. She whispered this to their attorney, who quickly requested time to investigate the claim. Over the next 2 days, Sebastian and Karen worked tirelessly to UNC the truth. They discovered that James Miller had only worked at the maintenance company that occasionally serviced the clinic's equipment. More importantly, they found emails between Thomas and Miller revealing a calculated scheme to fabricate evidence in exchange for payment. The truth came to light during the next hearing as Thomas stood before the judge. Karen suddenly rose from her seat. How dare you, she demanded, her voice trembling with anger. I've seen the emails, Thomas. You promised James Miller $10,000 to lie about Sebastian and Yoda. The courtroom erupted in whispers as Thomas's face reneged. Their attorney presented the printed emails to the judge while Thomas stammered, trying to maintain his composure. This was never about Yoda or the estate, was it? Karen continued, tears streaming down her face. Cass, you're just bitter that Henry left everything to me. Instead of you, you'd hurt an innocent animal and destroy a good man's reputation. Out of spite, Thomas's carefully constructed facade crumbled as the judge examined the evidence. His attorney's attempts to explain away the emails fell flat, and the horror of his deception spread through the courtroom like a wave. The final day of the trial arrived. With a hushed tea filling the courtroom, Karen approached the witness stand, her hands clasped tightly together as she faced the judge. Yoda wasn't just a pet to my late husband, she began, her voice soft but clear. Henry knew that one day I'd need Yoda's strength to go on without him, but when Henry died, I couldn't bear to look at Yoda. His loyalty reminded me of everything I'd lost. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she continued. It took seeing Yoda's recovery under Dr. Monroe's care to understand what Henry meant, watching Yoda fight to live, to trust again despite everything it taught me how to face my own grief. Sebastian then presented his evidence, including a carefully prepared video montage. The footage showed Yoda's journey from the night Sebastian found him barely alive and unable to walk to recent clips of him playing with children at the clinic and helping calm other injured animals. Yoda hasn't just recovered physically, Sebastian explained, his voice steady and passionate. He's become a therapy dog for other animals in our care. He seems to know exactly which ones need extra comfort. The video showed Yoda gently nuzzling a frightened kitten, then sitting patiently beside an injured puppy during treatment. Photos of community events followed, with Yoda surrounded by smiling children and grateful pet owners from his seat at the defense table. Thomas shifted uncomfortably as the judge reviewed all the evidence, including the earlier proof of his deception. Ethan sat in the gallery, his presence a steady support for both Sebastian and Karen. After what seemed like an eternity, the judge cleared her throat, having reviewed all evidence presented, including the UNT-408 attempt at deception by the plaintiff. I find in favor of Dr. Monroe and Miss Deo. Joint custody of Yoda is granted to both parties, and Mr. Thomas Deo's claim is Hereby dismissed, the sanctuary's grand reopening took place on a bright spring morning with colorful banners and balloons decorating the freshly painted buildings. Dozens of community members gathered on the sprawling grounds, their excited chatter filling the air. Yoda sat proudly beside Sebastian at the entrance, his tail wagging as he greeted each visitor. His coat now gleamed in the sunlight, showing no traces of his previous injuries. Children stopped to pet him, and he responded with gentle licks that made them giggle. Karen stepped up to the makeshift podium, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the microphone. "A year ago, I was lost in grief and darkness," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But thanks to Dr. Monroe's compassion and Yoda's unwavering spirit, I found my way back." She gestured to the crowd. "And thanks to all of you, this sanctuary will help other animals find their way back, too." Sebastian watched from the side, still amazed by how much had changed. Ethan stood nearby, beaming with pride as he took photos of the celebration. The renovated clinic sparkled with new equipment, and the expanded outdoor areas provided plenty of space for animals to heal and play. "We're not just saving animals here," Sebastian addressed the crowd after Karen finished. "We're creating a place where both people and animals can heal together." He knelt beside Yoda, running his hand through the dogs. "For Yoda taught us that second chances are possible, and that's exactly what this sanctuary represents." The crowd erupted in applause as Yoda barked happily, as if adding his own seal of approval to the proceedings. Karen joined Sebastian and Yoda, and together they cut the ribbon to officially open the sanctuary's gates. Karen stood at her brother's doorstep, her heart pounding against her chest. Thomas opened the door, his face hardening at the sight of her. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice cold. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Thomas," Karen said softly, "about everything that happened after Henry died, how I pushed everyone away, including you." Thomas crossed his arms, leaning against the door frame. "It's a bit late for apologies, don't you think?" Meanwhile, at the sanctuary, Sebastian and Ethan coordinated groups of volunteers who had shown up for the community workday. The sound of laughter and friendly chatter mixed with the scraping of paint rollers and the whir of power tools. Karen arrived later that morning, trading her usual business attire for old jeans and a t-shirt. She picked up a paintbrush, working alongside people who had once whispered about her in town. Yoda trotted between the groups, carrying his favorite tennis ball and dropping it at children's feet. "He's like a different dog," one of the mothers remarked, watching her daughter throw the ball for Yoda. "We're all different now," Karen replied, dabbing paint onto the clinic's walls. She thought about Thomas's cold reception, but the warmth surrounding her at the sanctuary gave her hope. Sebastian observed from across the yard as Karen knelt to help a young boy pet Yoda properly. The dog's tail wagged steadily, his eyes bright with trust. It was a far cry from their first reunion, when Yoda had growled and turned away from her. "The kids really love hearing about Yoda's story," Ethan said, joining Sebastian. "It teaches them about not giving up, about healing." Karen nodded, watching as Yoda gently took treats from tiny hands as patience with the children. Remarkable. She thought about Thomas again, wondering if perhaps, like Yoda, some wounds just needed more time to heal. The small Italian restaurant buzzed with quiet conversation as Karen, Sebastian, and Ethan settled into their corner booth. Yoda lay contentedly under the table, his tail occasionally thumping against their feet. "I've been thinking," Karen said, pushing her pasta around her plate. "The sanctuary is wonderful, but there's so much more we could do." Sebastian looked up from his meal, curiosity crossing his features. "What do you mean?" "I want to fund an educational outreach program," Karen said, her eyes brightening with enthusiasm. "We could help children understand animal care," and she paused, her voice softening. "We could also help families dealing with grief, like I was." Sebastian set down his fork, his expression uncertain. That's a huge undertaking, Karen. "Think about it," she continued, leaning forward. "Yoda's story touches everyone who hears it. We could organize workshops, bring in counselors, create programs where children learn about animals while processing their own emotions." Sebastian ran a hand through his hair, overwhelmed by the scope of her proposal. "I don't know if I'm qualified to." "You're more qualified than you think," Ethan interrupted gently. "I've seen how you work with people, Sebastian, the way you help Karen heal through Yoda. That's exactly what these families need." Karen nodded eagerly. "I'll handle all the funding, the organization. You just need to be Yourself, Sebastian, share your gift with others the way you shared it with me. Under the table, Yoda shifted, resting his head on Sebastian's foot as if lending his own quiet support to the idea the community would benefit so much. From this, Ethan added, my students already asked about visiting Yoda. Imagine how many more people we could help. Sebastian looked between his two friends, their faces full of hope and possibility. The morning of the sanctuary's grand opening dawned. Bright and clear, colorful balloons and ribbons adorned the newly painted buildings, and the sound of children's laughter filled the air. Sebastian stood at the entrance, watching his family streamed in there. Faces bright with excitement, Karen took the small podium they'd set up in the courtyard, her hands trembling slightly as she held her notes. A year ago, I was lost in grief and darkness. She began, her voice growing stronger. But a special dog named Yoda and a remarkable veterinarian taught me about second chances. The crowd listened intently as she spoke about redemption and healing. Several people wiped tears from their eyes, nodding in understanding. When it was Sebastian's turn to speak, he gestured for Yoda to join him. The German shepherd trotted forward, tail wagging, his once matted coat now gleaming in the sunlight. Yoda came to us broken and abandoned, Sebastian said, resting his hand on the dog's head, but his spirit never wavered. He showed us that with love and patience, anything is possible. Children gathered around Yoda, gentle hands reaching out to pet him as Sebastian shared the story of his rescue and recovery. Then Ethan stepped forward, a knowing smile on his face. We have one more surprise, he announced, leading everyone to the sanctuary's new wing. With a flourish, he unveiled a bronze plaque mounted beside the entrance, the Henry Deo Memorial Wing. Karen read aloud, her voice catching, where love heals all hearts. Below the words was an engraved image of Yoda. Sebastian squeezed Karen's shoulder as she traced the letters with trembling fingers around them. The sanctuary hummed with life, children playing with rescued puppies, families learning about animal care, and volunteers leading tours of the newly renovated facilities from a secluded spot beneath an old oak tree. Thomas Deo watched the celebration unfold. His shoulders were tense, his expression a mixture of longing and regret as he observed families enjoying the sanctuary's opening day festivities. He hadn't planned to come, but something had drawn him here. Karen noticed her brother standing alone, partially hidden in the shade. Her heart ached at the sight of him, looking so lost and isolated. Taking a deep breath, she made her way across the lawn toward him. I didn't expect to see you here, she said softly, stopping a few feet away. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. I wasn't going to come, he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. But I needed to see it for myself. See what all of this, he gestured at the sanctuary, at the happy faces of the visitors. What you've built here, what you're trying to make right. Karen moved closer, noticing the tears gathering in her brother's eyes. Thomas, I've missed you so much, she whispered. Even when we were fighting, even when you were trying to take Yoda away, you're still my brother. Thomas's facade cracked. I was wrong, he said, his voice breaking. About everything, but mostly I was wrong about Henry. What do you mean? The night of his accident, Thomas continued, struggling to maintain his composure. I was supposed to pick him up from the airport, but I was angry about the estate decisions, about how he was handling things, so I didn't go. He had to take a taxi, and then he trailed off, his shoulders shaking. Karen felt her own tears falling. Oh, Thomas, you've been carrying this all this time. I couldn't face you after that. It was easier to be angry, to blame you for everything else, to try to control what was left of the estate, including Yoda. He wiped roughly at his eyes, but seeing all this, seeing how you've changed, how you're honoring Henry's memory. Karen closed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around her brother. Tomas stiffened for a moment before collapsing into the embrace, years of guilt and grief pouring out as he held on to his sister. Henry would have loved this place, Thomas said through his tears. He always believed in second chances. Then, let's take ours, Karen replied, holding him tighter. It's not too late for us, Thomas. From across the lawn, Sebastian watched the siblings' reunion with Yoda sitting calmly at his feet. The German shepherd's tail wagged gently as Thomas pulled back from the embrace and reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out an envelope. I want to help, Thomas said, handing it to Karen, not just with money, but really help with the sanctuary, with the programs, everything if you'll let me. Karen took the envelope, but immediately pulled her brother into another hug. Of course, I'll let you, she said. We're family. The evening sun cast long shadows across the sanctuary grounds as Sebastian stood before the memorial plaque. Its polished surface gleamed the words etched deeply in loving memory of Henry Deo, whose vision of unconditional love lives on through every life touched. Here below, that was a smaller inscription, and to Yoda, whose courage showed us the way home. Yoda sat quietly beside him, his gray muzzle touched with the golden light of sunset. The German shepherd's presence was steady and warm against Sebastian's leg, a constant reminder of how far they'd both come. I never thought I'd find my way back here, Sebastian said softly, more to himself than to Yoda. His mind drifted to that devastating day years ago when he'd lost a patient through a mistake. He couldn't forgive himself, for the weight of that guilt had nearly crushed him, driving him away from his dreams and into isolation. Neither did the rest of us. Ethan's voice came from behind him. The school teacher approached quietly, hands in his pockets. But look at what you've built here, Sebastian. Look at how many lives you're changing. Sebastian reached down to scratch behind Yoda's ears. He changed mine first, he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. When I found him that night in the rain, I was just going through the motions, existing, not living. And now, Ethan asked, though his gentle smile suggested he already knew the answer. Now, Sebastian paused, watching as a family walked past with their newly adopted rescue dog. The children's laughter echoed across the grounds, bright and hopeful. Now I remember why I became a vet in the first place. It was never just about treating animals. It was about healing hearts, theirs and ours. Ethan nodded, stepping closer to the plaque. You know, people keep asking about Yoda's story, about your story. They want to know how this place came back to life. I wouldn't even know where to begin, Sebastian said, but there was a hint of consideration in his voice. Start with that rainy night, Ethan suggested. Start with the moment you chose to stop running from your past and face it. Instead, he turned to face Sebastian fully. Your journey could help others find their way back to. Yoda looked up at Sebastian, his brown eyes wise in understanding. The dog had been through so much abandonment, injury, betrayal, yet here he stood full of love and trust. Sebastian felt his throat tighten with emotion. Maybe you're right, he said quietly, running his hand along Yoda's back. Maybe it's time to share our story. The setting sun painted the sanctuary in warm hues, highlighting the new buildings, the fresh paint, the signs of renewal. Everywhere in the distance, he could hear the sounds of animals being fed, volunteers chatting, and the gentle rhythm of life continuing forward. Yoda pressed closer to Sebastian's side, offering the same unwavering support he'd shown since that first night together they stood before the plaque, surrounded by the legacy of second chances they'd helped create. The weekend brought perfect weather for the sanctuary's first community picnic. Checkered blankets dotted the green meadow, and the air filled with the sounds of laughter, barking, and cheerful conversation. Children ran around with paper plates loaded with sandwiches and cookies, while parents chatted in small groups, sharing stories of their own rescued pets. Karen had outdone herself with the preparations. Tables groaned under platters of food, and colorful banners stretched between the newly painted buildings, declaring welcome to your sanctuary family. She moved through the crowd with easy grace, so different from the withdrawn woman she'd been just months ago. I never thought I'd see this place so full of life again, Sebastian said, watching as Yoda bounded through the meadow with a group of children. The German shepherd's coat gleamed in the sunlight, his once matted fur now healthy and thick. His limp was barely noticeable as he gently played fetch with a little girl in pigtails. He's come such a long way, Ethan remarked, standing beside Sebastian, just like someone else I know. Sebastian smiled, unable to argue. The sanctuary hummed with activity, volunteers leading tours, families meeting potential pets, and everywhere signs of healing and hope. Yoda paused in his play to check on Sebastian, as he often did. Their eyes met across the meadow, and Sebastian felt that familiar surge of gratitude. The dog's tail wagged, and he trotted over to where Karen was showing a young couple around the new rehabilitation center. Look at him, Karen said softly as Yoda approached. He knows exactly who needs his special brand to comfort. The couple had recently lost their elderly dog, and Yoda pressed against them, gently offering his own form of solace. The afternoon sun bathed the meadow in golden light. As families gathered for group photos, Yoda moved from group to group, as if making sure everyone felt welcomed and loved. His transformation from the broken dog Sebastian had found in the rain to this confident, joyful creature seemed nothing short of miraculous. Henry would have loved this, Karen said, joining Sebastian and Ethan at their spot overlooking the meadow. Her voice held peace instead of pain. He always said Yoda had a way of bringing out the best in people. Sebastian watched as Yoda returned to the children's game. His movements fluid and strong. The dog caught a soft tennis ball in midair, drawing cheers from his young playmates. Their delight echoed across the sanctuary grounds, mingling with the sounds of other animals and happy conversations. It's more than just a sanctuary now, Ethan observed, gesturing to the gathered community. It's become a place of new beginnings. They stood together watching Yoda run free in the meadow. He'd helped bring back to life. His journey from broken survivor to beloved healer mirrored their own path, from loss to redemption, from isolation to connection, from fear to love. The German Shepherd paused in his play, looking back at the three humans who had become his family. His brown eyes held the same wisdom and warmth that had touched so many lives, a living reminder that even the deepest wounds could heal with time, patience, and love. If you enjoyed the story of Dr. Sebastian and Yoda, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.